Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Blue Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello from the future, Karla. How are you today? Oh, sorry, Karla, you're on mute.
Oh, good. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. It was so funny when we talked earlier and you were saying, how is it in the future? And yeah, for our listeners who aren't aware, we're actually in two different time zones. I'm here in Melbourne, I'm in the future. And Karla, you said you're in, I'm sorry, again, I forgot the location,
Northern
exact name.
California.
Northern
Yeah.
California. There we go. So you're
Yeah.
still, you're still yesterday for me. Yesterday was a good day, and the future it's actually quite good. It's quite sunny today, so I have to say it's a nice day in the future. So yeah.
Oh, very nice. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's such a cool thing to happen, right? Because I think pre-pandemic we don't see a lot of this, but now we actually see quite a few podcasts and people do this. And I think for us it's such a privilege to be able to connect with you, even though you're pretty much on the other side of the planet. You know, it's kind of it's beautiful how we just started by saying this is the future. You know what? We're going to
Yeah.
talk about it as if we're in the future.
Yeah.
So the podcast that we invited you to join, and thanks again for joining us, is really centered around well-being. You know, we have a lot of topics when we talk about well-being, right? And it's such a broad concept nowadays, and especially when it is 2022, we're slowly getting out of the pandemic. It's not over, but it seems like well-being is such a big thing for us. And today we're going to talk about your area of expertise, which is actually something that really is close to my heart. Self-awareness to me is something that I've been working on a lot these days, especially, as a big part of my well-being. And I'm sure listeners feel the same way. So before we go into the podcast as usual, I would love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners, because obviously it is such a beautiful topic. I'm sure you're a beautiful human, so you're here today to talk to us. But who is Karla? Who is Karla as a professional? Who is Karla as a human? I'm sure listeners and myself would love to hear more from your perspective.
Well, thank you. I'm Karla McLaren, and I am a writer and a publisher and an author, and I focus on emotions and empathy. Those are the most interesting things to me, but also on things that impede emotions and empathy. So I study all sorts of things, and people say, connect that to emotions and empathy. And I'm like, well, here's how I did it. So I have sort of a broad range of things that I like to um, study. And I have been really interested in studying people and social structures and animals since I was very young. So it's like a sort of a piece of my life's work to focus primarily on emotions and empathy. Um, yeah, but I've studied the workplace, murder, uh, autism, cults, all sorts of things. Like things just they become really interesting to me, and yeah. So I'm always learning.
Yeah, that is such a wide range of topics, and some of them could
It
actually
is.
be, quite how can I say it, sensitive. Some of the
Oh
topics are
yeah.
actually like sensitive to people, and it's kind of hard to talk about. So, what got you
Mhm.
interested in these topics in the first place?
Well, I think with emotions and empathy, it started in a difficult way, which was that I was abused as a very young child for a number of years, and like a lot of children who were abused, I developed a hypersensitivity to people and their behaviors so that I could keep myself safe to the extent that any child can. But because I became so hypersensitive at that time and I could read and feel emotions very intensely, I didn't know how I turned that on, so I didn't know how to turn it off. And so I ended up being a very intense, hyper aware kid, very angry, trying to, use anger to set boundaries and get people away from me. And my emotions were very powerful. So for me, studying the emotions wasn't, sort of an intellectual exercise of like, that would be interesting, but I need to figure these out or I'm going to go under because it's so intense here in this body and in this world. So for me, that was the beginning of it, is understanding emotions, understanding humans, understanding human evil, understanding human nature. And so that was sort of taking a terrible early life and turning it into turning it into research. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that such a horrible thing happened to you when you were a child, but also thank you for sharing your story. I think honesty and being brave enough to share such a difficult thing, it's rare, and it's important because stories shape our lives, and
Mhm.
especially because it's so close to your heart, it helps
Mhm.
to connect, and it helps you to actually get interested in these areas. And I'm sure it kind of comes from a place where it's empathy is not only the tools you use for yourself, but also it has helped a lot of people. And today with the podcast, hopefully it will reach even more people over the world. And I think um, I I think we should all listen to what you have to say with that kind of background, because it makes a lot of sense when we take your story into account. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the topic itself today is quite broad. Self awareness. I mean, it is.
Mhm.
To some people it might be really clear, it might be really obvious, but to others
Mhm.
maybe not. And I think for me, I've noticed that when I was younger, like my younger self in my early 20s, for example, or even when I was a teenager, it wasn't a thing. Maybe I heard about it, but I just didn't really register it as well. And as an
Yeah.
adult, as I keep growing, I realized that, oh, it actually makes so much sense. So let's start with the definition. That would help our listeners get into the mindset of today's discussion. So to you, based on your research, based on your work, what does self-awareness mean?
I would say that it is primarily an emotional skill because the research on emotions is moving very, very quickly, but what we're understanding more and more is that emotions are not separate from logic or whatever they want to separate it from, but that emotions are the basis of how you function as a person. So everything you do, everything you believe, every action, every decision you make is predicated by your emotions. And if you don't know your emotions or what they do or how they work, you will not really understand why you do the things you do. You won't really have a handle on yourself. And so for me, understanding the emotions and understanding how my emotions work means that I become aware of myself at a very deep level of sort of the motivation for why I am who I am.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me it's and empathy, also empathy with myself and empathy with my own emotions to understand, whoa, I'm feeling really depressed right now. So what is that about? What is that trying to tell me, instead of, running screaming to do something, anything but feel depressed, right? A lot of people treat their emotions as something to run from, but if they do, they're running from self-awareness.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so interesting, because I think I can totally reflect on, my past behaviors, and I was like, you know what? I was totally running away from myself, or like running away from how I felt even. And
Yeah.
I mean, maybe self-awareness back then was too hard for me,
Yeah.
because it's I feel like it's a learning curve as well. It's about it's also about accepting who you are as you are, and
Hmm.
sometimes that is so hard, especially when you feel like, oh, like I'm not meeting my own expectations, or I'm failing others, or like I'm
Yeah.
doing things that aren't good for me, but I just don't want to acknowledge it. And that comes a lot from self-awareness. So
Hmm.
to me, like when you just share that definition, I was like, yep, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And that's why it was so scary for me personally. So, yeah, I'm sure a lot of
Yeah.
our audience would learn from that today. And that is the pretext to what we're going to discuss about. So, just a little bit of a preview, like a trailer. And before we go into that discussion in depth, we do have a fun activity to start with just to get to know Kala a little bit better. And we like to call it Have You Met Kala? So
Okay.
this is where you're gonna share 5 things that you like, or you have recently been exposed to that you really want to share with our audience.
Hmm.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So number one, we would love to hear about a book that you would recommend.
There's a beautiful new book I'm reading called The End of Trauma by
Mm.
George Bonanno. And he shows that basically you're 2 times more likely to get through trauma and do well than you are to fall apart. And that is a wonderful message. And he's got the research to back it up.
Oh, that is a really interesting one. I would have to put it on my list for sure.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
good. Mm.
yeah. Number two, how about a movie you would recommend?
Raising Arizona, which has some of the best lines that ever have been in a movie. It's a very
Oh,
bizarre, silly movie. Yeah.
oh,
And
really?
it's early
Okay.
Nick Cage. Yeah. It's early Nicolas Cage before the money grab. But yeah, it's really extremely silly movie.
Oh wow, okay. We do have the love for silly movies and just easy watch sometimes. So I'm gonna definitely, check it out this weekend. Number three, what about a podcast that you listened to recently?
I, except for this one, I do not listen to podcasts. I have a very hard time sitting anywhere listening to things,
Oh wow.
unless I'm in the car.
Yeah.
It's the only place that because otherwise I need to write, I need to be doing something. So it's
Mm.
very hard for me to just sit and listen to anything. It's weird.
Oh, that's interesting. And you're doing a
Yeah,
podcast. Yeah, but
I
actually
know.
you are in the podcast. You're not listening to the podcast. So you're actually like actively, sharing insights, talking to me, and that's different. So yeah, that makes sense. How about your famous role model?
I'd have to say the sociologist Arlie Russell Hochschild. She's like one of my like she's like I'm such a fangirl of her.
Yeah.
She's amazing. Yeah, she's a sociologist of emotion, and she's just a brilliant person.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing about her. And what about a course you have completed? That's our final one.
The taken or written?
Um, it says you have completed. I think it's loosely defined here. Maybe you can choose either.
I just completed, or I'm in the final week of teaching a course called Embracing Your Anxiety. And
Mm.
so when I teach a course, I'm taking the course at the same time. So I think
Yeah.
I get 2 points for that one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, you did. That is so interesting, that course, because I think I would love to take that course personally.
Yeah, I really
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
yeah. I think we all have anxiety as humans, and
Yeah.
I've read up so much upon it, and like do different things around getting to know anxiety better and deal with it better. But the concept of embracing it, I think that's very very interesting. So that's really cool to know. Thank you for sharing. And there we have gotten to know you a little bit better, and hopefully our listeners feel a bit closer to you. And now we are ready. We have warmed up, so we're ready to talk about the topic of the day, which is self
Mhm.
awareness in more depth. We always start before discussing the topic, of course, by taking a look at the bigger picture,
Mhm.
because we're talking about well-being on the show a lot. So to you, then, what would be your personal definition of well-being?
I think for me, it would have lots and lots of room for many different levels of emotional kind of reality. I think for me, it would be to be angry when I'm angry and happy when I'm happy and envious when I'm envious, and to feel into those and to maintain a life that is, I would say, balanced in terms of emotions and intellect and body and vision, so that I'm not sort of pushing things into the shadow to the extent that anybody can keep things out of the shadow, but to try to become a whole person,
Yeah.
um, and to have a whole, real, often difficult life.
Hmm. That is a very different definition from usual, because,
Mhm.
when it comes to well-being, a lot of people talk about like how well you are doing. So it's
Yeah.
an absence of ill-being, so you're doing well in all different areas of your life. But I feel like you have a more holistic approach when it comes to well-being because it's a state, rather than
Mhm.
when we talk about like how it should be. It's not
Mhm.
something that needs to be positive all the time, I guess. It's more like understanding ourselves and taking care of ourselves. So that's a really wholesome definition. And with the definition, what would be some of the misconceptions that you see, or you have observed when people think about well-being?
I think many people see it as a steady state where everything's going well. Your relationships are going well and your job is going well. You've got enough money to manage. And a lot of times those are not true. You can't have that throughout your whole life. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think people might look at difficulties in their life and think it is a commentary on their own capacity to manage or to create well-being. Um, and I'm saying let's do well-being when we feel crappy, when our job is terrible, when our relationships, we just aren't communicating well, and to experience that in its fullness without sort of holding ourselves up to this strange, bloodless, view of how life should be.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think from that, what I take is it's more like about how you manage your well-being rather than saying, "Oh, my well-being should be perfect."
Yeah.
It's not. I don't think it's possible, or it's
Yeah.
the same for everybody because we have things happening in our lives and there's so much to manage as well. So it's more
Hmm.
about taking care of that part of your life. So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that definition and the misconceptions of well-being. And now
Hmm.
that we have covered the topic, the definition of self-awareness before, to relate it back to this bigger picture, what do you say would be the effects that self-awareness would have on your well-being?
I think without self-awareness, your well-being might be based on external things like money. I mean, everybody needs money. This is capitalist world, right? But but I think if you're not really connected to yourself, your well-being would be probably your fitness, your possessions, the things on the outside that make you look as if you're
Mhm.
doing well.
Yeah.
Um, and I think if you have self-awareness, a lot of those things can fall away, and you're still going to be okay. It's not going to be like hung on those like a clothes hanger. Instead, you'll be able to say, yeah, things are pretty crappy right now. I am not looking good,
Yeah.
but this is a growth process. So
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
it does. I think I think they mesh together quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when it comes to having that self-awareness, you'll be able to say, you know what, I'm feeling really anxious, and that's
Mhm.
affecting my overall well-being. So now it's on me to manage my anxiety so that I can manage my well-being. So you're right, like they just really mesh together. They're so closely related, and that
Mhm.
is why having that self-awareness to take care of yourself is
Mhm.
going to be sort of like the key to manage your well-being better. Because again,
Mhm.
yeah, well-being is not about like, oh yeah, you're perfectly well on all aspect, but it's more about like, do you actually know what's going on so you can manage it better? So I think that's kind of how I see it as well. So
Mhm.
that is the correlation, or the relationship that we're talking about today, self-awareness, well-being.
Mhm.
But I think from your work, a lot of the research, I think, from what we know about your work, is it also has a lot to do about emotional self-awareness.
Mhm.
And because you talked about emotions earlier. So what would be the definition, and what would be sort of some of the key things around emotional self-awareness that we should know about?
Well, I think one of the most exciting things that they're looking at in the research, and this is from Lisa Feldman Barrett and her colleagues, is that emotional vocabulary is massive. Just developing a better emotional vocabulary will all by itself give you better emotion regulation abilities. And it's likely because now you are in a self awareness process, right? So instead of just like, I feel bad, and what does that even mean? You can't do anything about it except say, I just want to feel good, but you have no information. So instead of saying, I feel sad, and I know that sadness means I need to let something go. So I know what I can do, or I feel a soft kind of peevish anger, right? The more articulate you are with your emotional vocabulary, the more self aware you become, but also the more you're able to actually do something about it because you know which emotion you're feeling instead of this kind of amorphous badness. And so learning to work with your emotions, saying, I feel, this level of sarcastic, and I know that that means I'm angry,
Mm,
but I'm not able to really speak it openly. So, what are my next steps to make sure that my relationships are actually functional or that I'm saying what I need to say? Um, yeah, so I think emotional awareness is like crucial, especially within relationships, that I know how I'm feeling when you say something to me or treat me a certain way. I know how things are going between us because I can say, I feel kind of, I feel kind of depressed in this relationship. I
mm.
feel a bit down. I feel a bit dejected in this relationship, and then begin to understand how this relationship is, how you're responding to it, how it's affecting you.
Yeah. That is so important, actually, because when I think about having the vocabulary, that's one thing. But another thing that you touched on earlier is that we are social beings. So we are, constantly
Mhm.
interacting with others. But
Mhm.
sometimes when we don't actually know what's going on, if we cannot put our fingers around what exactly it is that we're feeling, we tend to lash out at others, or we tend to stonewall people, I think.
Mhm.
At least from my personal experience, noticing different behaviors from people, and just watching a lot of talks and you're reading research upon this. I think it starts from within us. We if we don't have that capability or capacity to really sit with ourselves and define what it is that we're feeling, and it's going to be really
Mhm.
hard for us to then go about interacting with others.
Mhm.
And I think actually one of the things that I'm curious about when it comes to this is, emotional awareness. Yes, it helps when we interact with others, but what about when we're alone? Because I think,
Yeah.
for let's just say, for a lot of us, especially throughout the pandemic, we've spent a lot of time alone.
Mhm.
For a lot of people, obviously, if you're living with your family, you're still, like, having interactions every day. For me personally, for example, I'm amongst those people that lived by myself. And what I've
Mhm.
realized is that there are certain points when I was by myself, and I couldn't really put my fingers around why I was behaving a certain way. And now that I look back on it, it was because of how I was feeling. I didn't have that
Mhm.
emotional self-awareness, and I just sort of let myself go, and I just, went with the flow, or didn't really take care of myself. So,
Mhm.
do you think there would be any kind of tips, or anything that we can do in our power to help us identify those emotions as they arise, and also sort of be with ourselves in peace? I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but I just find it sometimes really hard to sit by yourself, do your thing, or even just to move forward and do the simplest thing, because I couldn't, pinpoint what it was that I was feeling.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so important when you're alone to have a strong emotional vocabulary and to really know what you're feeling, because what I find is that each of the emotions has really powerful messages for you, and they are not the opposite of intelligence. They are a fundamental aspect of intelligence. So each emotion is trying to help you and trying to get your attention and trying to bring specific gifts and skills to you. And if you don't know that, you can miss it. You can just miss it. So, for instance, um, depression, which is an emotion, this is situational depression, not the more serious forms of depression like bipolar or major depression, but situational depression relates to a situation. And many people who were alone during the pandemic found themselves feeling depressed. And depression takes away your energy when something's wrong. And things were wrong during the pandemic, okay? Things were
Yeah.
wrong. If you don't know that and you can't sort of speak to your depression and say, okay, what's wrong, and why is my energy being pulled away, and what can I do to get myself into a better situation if it's at all possible, to work as a partner with my depression. If I can't do that, probably more and more and more and more and more of my energy is going to drain away. Depression is going to do its work, but without my partnership, without my awareness. And so I'll just sort of be at the end, you know, the end of a 5-week period going, I can't even get up today. I cannot get
Mm,
up and I don't know why.
mm,
So that self-awareness piece, especially when you're alone, sometimes I find that it is times when I'm alone that I can be most connected to my emotions because there's nobody distracting me.
mm.
Right? When
That's
you're in a
true.
relationship, you're very much with the other person and you're responding to what's going on with them. And so you can kind of ignore what's going on inside yourself. Um, so, yeah, there are periods where I just need to be alone so I can figure out what the heck I'm feeling.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. So I think you touched on depression a little bit, and I think it was a real thing during the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, and even now, like even though we're slowly getting out of the pandemic, it's not like it's going anywhere. It's kind of like the epidemic of the 21st century. I think it's
Yeah.
something that has been affecting quite a few people, and actually, I've noticed that the situational depression. I'm not going to say I never had it. I was one of those people that I've definitely went through that. And I think it was actually quite hard to pinpoint what it was, or, how to even
Mm-hmm.
name it, and the emotions that were associated with it, because it was not
Mm-hmm.
just one word. I think it was not just like, oh, I'm feeling depressed. It's much more than that, like
Yes.
I'm feeling uneasy, or like I'm feeling like maybe it's languishing that I'm feeling. There's, like, lots of other things
Yeah.
that could be happening. And for us, for ordinary everyday people, someone who didn't really like, know much about psychology, emotions, or do research in these areas, it could be hard
Mm-hmm.
to really even just say it to themselves, to ourselves. And I think
Yeah.
one of the interesting thing that emerged out of all of this is that emotional fluency apparently is a thing. And
Yeah.
we just touched on emotional self-awareness and self-awareness in general, and being able to sit with yourself. So how would all of that affect your emotional fluency? What is it really? And how can everyday people curate it, if there's a way?
The vocabulary is magical. Vocabulary is absolutely magical. And what what it's called in the research I've looked at is emotional granularity.
Mm,
And so it is to be able to say, here's anger as a category. Now, am I feeling rage? Am I feeling, you know, peevishness? Am I feeling, what level of anger am I feeling, to get really very, very granular and come
mm,
all the way down to where you are. And for me also to work with, okay, I'm feeling a little bit of sadness, a little bit of anger. Okay, there's some depression too. Okay, there's some grief. You know what I mean? It's like, and knowing that each of these emotions has skills to bring to me, my granularity gives me even more access to what the emotions are trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
and gives me more access to my basic skills. Emotions are our skills from before we were humans. We Emotions were how we understood the world, and they still are. They were how we communicated, and they still are. And so they have sort of a primordial wisdom that they've carried um, through through the eons. And so connecting into emotions, it's just so nice to know that all you got to do is develop a more granular emotional vocabulary, and then suddenly you're welcomed into this world uh,
Mm.
that has been sort of moving underneath you your whole life long.
Yeah.
But if all we have is I feel bad, I feel good, we just don't have the tools and awareness we need to be
Yeah.
able to access them. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that is a really good point. And to that point, you said that we sort of need to understand our emotions and be really granular when it comes to how we feel to be able to I can say manage our well-being maybe because as
Mhm.
you said earlier, when it comes to the definition of well-being, it's like holistically who you are, how you are, and it's interesting because I don't think we actually look at it that way though. At the moment, as far as I can
Yeah.
notice,
Yeah.
you said it's so important, right? But I don't think a majority of us as humans actually look at emotions as and self awareness, emotional self awareness as a way to manage our well being. It's more in the sense that
Mhm.
oh, like if things go sideways or if something goes bad, I'll deal with it. I'll manage my well being, and sometimes it could also
Yeah.
be like oh, to manage your well-being, just eat well, sleep well, and like everything will be peachy, but it's not. And I think uh I think it's very interesting to actually talk about this in a bit more detail because it's probably hard for people to actually connect the dots. So to you then, how do we say, okay, this is emotional self awareness. This is your well
Mhm.
being. You're actually using the tools here to manage your well being, but in a more, I would say, like friendly everyday language. How does that actually apply? Do you think?
Mhm.
Mm.
Well, for me, and I've been doing this for decades, it's really keeping a continual awareness of how I'm feeling about things in order to listen to me, my own individual, unique self, and how I'm responding to the world. Even in a family that's very close knit, you think about something that happened, and everyone will have a very different reaction to it. Right. And if there's some bullying going on, then one of the people will say, no, this is how we felt as a family. Right. And I was like, nah, that's not how that happened. But to know that understanding my uniqueness means that I'm going to be walking on the path that I'm meant to walk on in this world rather than, I think a lot of, I don't know if you're on Instagram, but if you go to the
Yeah, I am.
hashtag well-being, a
Mhm.
lot of yoga happening. There's a lot of
Okay.
buying buying yoga clothes or
Right.
buying well-being. Like I had a well-being massage. Um, it's about this exterior kind of, I don't want to say plastic, but I sort of want to say plastic.
Yeah.
Um, it's what you buy.
Mm.
It's what is in fashion. It is the hashtag. Um,
Right.
Rather than, do I even want a massage?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why do I need special clothes to do yoga?
Yeah.
Uh, did people in India, hundreds of years ago doing
Yeah.
yoga, did they have these mats? I don't think
Yeah.
they did.
Yeah.
But
That's such a good point.
yeah, so much about well-being right now is commercialized.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
that's sort of the opposite of well-being. That's kind of, you're being pushed into a direction of more and more buying and more like this should make me feel good instead of asking yourself, what do I want to do today? And if the answer is lay around, play with puppies, that should be your well-being practice for that day. Or
Yeah.
yeah, watch a whole bunch of Netflix and
Mhm.
right, and make my own lemonade.
Yeah.
Um, but just feeling how you feel and doing what you want, and having your life be a continual exploration rather than a way to make marks on the hashtag of whatever
Mm.
well-being is trying to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so interesting actually, because you know what? I've been actually doing the Science of Wellbeing course by Yale, the free
Hmm.
course on Coursera, and I have to say like the the learning there, like just at the very beginning of the journey, but it they did talk a lot about that, like like the Instagram, the external, when you think
Yeah.
that, oh yeah, like this will bring me like so much joy and happiness, and it will help me with my well-being. It's not, it's just what society is telling you to do. But
Yeah.
from what we are talking about today, it's actually more about recognizing what's going on inside here. What do
Yeah.
what do you want to do to sort of deal with this? It's not,
Yes.
like you said, it's not buying new yoga clothes, because you can buy new yoga clothes, but are you going to do yoga? Like that's a whole different story, right? um
But I have the clothes, and that's the
yeah.
important thing.
Yeah, yeah, I have the
Yeah.
right clothes, but I'm not going to do yoga,
I could.
I
I
yeah.
could do yoga.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think that is very different from what we see every single day, and sometimes it's just, it takes away the beauty of connecting to yourself and just doing the simplest things, like you said. Sometimes you just want to laze around, and that's okay. But then the
Mhm.
first step is actually recognizing that you want that in the first place. Because, for
Yes.
example, oh, I'm feeling emotionally unwell, in the sense that I'm feeling a bit sad, a bit depressed. Maybe all I want to do today is just curl up in a ball and, like, I don't know, comfort myself. And that's
Mhm.
okay, because actually that came from the emotional self-awareness, and you allow yourself to do that, rather than letting other people tell you, "Hey, buy this and then buy that and then you feel better." And then, you end up being broke and not even feeling any better. So, I think that is very important to us in our overall well-being, because one good thing leads to another good thing, and then vice versa. One bad decision could lead to a whole heap of other bad decisions as well. um
Yeah.
and actually that gives me the sort of pretext to mention self-regulation here, because it's so important in our everyday life. It's so important, especially when it comes to our well-being. And
Mhm.
I'm kind of making the connection there, but what would be your thoughts on this topic? What would be the effect, the maybe the positive effect, or the relationship between emotional self-awareness and self-regulation? How can we make that happen for ourselves?
Yes. I mean, there's a direct correlation between a granular emotional vocabulary and your emotional self-regulation abilities. It's like a two for one. It's free. Um, that, and I have on my website, I have a free emotional vocabulary list because it's
Yeah.
so important. I'm like, everybody download this, and we've got it in 6 languages at this point. But but you can't regulate what you don't know, right? If you have no idea how you're feeling or what's going on or why you feel that way, the only regulation you're going to do is probably repression, right? And then sometimes repression is okay. But
Mm,
if that's your basic regulation, then each time you do that, you are reducing your self awareness, right? And then what is your well being going to be if you don't even know who and what you are?
mm,
Um, your well being may be whatever they're selling this week for the well being hashtag. Um, you'll be like, oh, that's going to make me feel better. That's going to help stop me from feeling bad. From feeling bad, I'm going to feel good now. And we don't even know what good means and what bad means. Like you were saying before, I feel sad and I feel a little bit of depression. I want to just lay down and take care of myself, which would be a perfect self regulation,
mm.
right? You
Yeah.
were going toward the emotion that was there instead of saying, what I want to do is go on a merry-go-round and jack myself up with loud music, right? It's like, no, that's
Yeah.
not what's called for at this point.
Yeah.
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 What about I think this discussion happened amongst our teams, and people that I've talked to quite a bit. What about the self-awareness and self-regulation in the context of, let's say, overeating or stress eating, or like binge
Mhm.
drinking, the things that we know that would affect our state of well-being,
Mhm.
negatively, but we go for it anyway because it's like a coping mechanism,
Yeah.
and yeah, I agree that it's good to, for example, let ourselves just do nothing, maybe watch Netflix, but the self-regulation here would be very important when we don't go to extremes as well. What do you reckon?
Mhm. Yeah. There's an absolutely wonderful person working in addiction care named Lance Dotis. He's a doctor from Harvard. And he's pointed out that our movement toward addictive or distracting practices is a healthy movement away from a sense of powerlessness or helplessness, where we're feeling just like crappy. We don't have better words for it than that. We're just whatever. And this movement toward drinking or delicious food that we eat too much of, or refusing to exercise because we don't have the right yoga clothes. This movement is healthy. This movement away from emotional overwhelm or emotional pain is healthy. It's just that what we move to has no healing properties.
Right.
So alcohol is not going to change why we're sad or why we're
Mm,
feeling depressed or why we're so angry at our parents or whatever. Alcohol will just take us out of commission for a minute and then we come back. All of those emotions are still there. The whole, you know, use, useless relationship with our parents is still there, unchanged. And now we have a hangover.
mm.
So going toward those things is a healthy movement, but the things themselves won't do anything at all. And that's, I think, or what he says, that's how addictions get started. Because now you go back, the sadness and depression and trouble are still there, but now they're worse. And you're like, I need to drink again. Or I need to eat a lot more ice cream or,
Yeah.
some other comfort food. And so what I really love about his work, and the work is in The Heart of Addiction and Breaking Addiction,
Mm.
um, is to look at what your emotional overwhelm is, focus on that, and let drinking be its own thing. Let eating be its own thing. Separate them out and start looking at what is going on that is driving you there.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's been just such a wonderful. I just threw myself into his work, but because I've seen so many addiction healing approaches are very, very shaming there. And if you're gonna be like, I'm dealing with all this sadness and depression and my parents, I go to drink. That didn't work, but I need to drink again. And the people on the outside shaming you.
Mm.
Now you've got hangovers, some liver problems, depression, shame, trouble with your parents, more shame. Now sad. Do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
doesn't help. It doesn't help to
Yeah.
shame people. It actually makes it more likely that they will have to go to that displacement, that addictive behavior,
Yeah.
because now you've just loaded them up with more emotions that they don't know how to work with.
Yeah. That is so
Yeah.
interesting how, if we don't have the vocabulary for ourselves in the first place, that actually might affect others, in ways that we didn't
Yeah.
foresee, negatively nonetheless.
Yeah.
And that could actually be detrimental to, people around you and maybe even yourself without you realizing. And I think, you know, realizing that, yep, I'm feeling a certain way and this is my coping mechanism is, it's kind of a good thing to start with. But like you said, it's also important to recognize that there's a root cause for the feeling that you're
Yeah.
feeling, and you got to work on solving the problem there. That's the
Mhm.
root cause. So, okay, how do we deal with that, instead of saying, you know what, I'm just going to run away from the problem, run away from how I'm feeling, and I'm just going to have some more ice cream because that's really delicious. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not easy, I have to say. And,
Mhm.
perhaps we'll touch on some good practice a bit later. But I know that you also work with, the workplace quite a bit in
Mhm.
your research and in your work. And obviously, we're
Mhm.
talking about self awareness. One of the things that is really important in the workplace, given all the things that we're talking about here, is that we understand we are humans. We're not just
Yes.
workers. We're all
Yes.
humans going to work, and we're all humans collaborating to deliver something together. And that requires empathy,
Hmm.
because a lot of the time it could just be, oh, it's all business here. We
Yeah.
need to get this done. You cannot let your emotions affect you. And I feel like that's a bit toxic, especially
Yeah.
given, the years that we've gone through now. We've seen that, everyone's pretty much working from home. Home is where work is where your home is. And it's not just work. You are still, while you are a worker, you could still be a mother, a daughter, a
Hmm.
father. It could be anything. And it's so important in the workplace well-being as well, because we're not just talking about individual well-being now. We can
Yes.
take it a step further, because so much of your life is at work. So
Hmm.
from your research, from your work, how do you see curating empathy and developing self-awareness help in the workplace?
You're right that in the workplace, you're not just dealing with your own individual self, you're dealing with a social group, you're dealing with a social structure. And everyone brings their level of emotional awareness to that. And it's not very high. We don't tend to have very good emotional training. We don't have very good emotional education, considering that most of us need to go get a list on my site to find vocabulary words. That
Yeah.
it's that rare.
Yeah.
But what I do when I go into workplaces is I listen very carefully to what emotions are happening there. What emotions are at the forefront? Is it anxiety? Is it anger? Is it jealousy or envy? Is it um, depression? Are people in burnout? Right, that's a pretty dangerous place for people to be. Um, and I don't know if it happened where you are, but here in the United States, there was something called the Great Resignation.
Yeah. Same
Over
here.
Okay, you had it, where
Yeah.
just hundreds of thousands of people a month were just saying bye to the workplace. Bye bye.
Yeah.
um, Trying to get better jobs, getting themselves in a better place. But what we saw is that the workplace was not built for human beings. It was built for the workplace, right? It was built for getting the job done, but not for
Yeah.
taking care of people. So the
Yeah.
workplace, in and of itself, is pretty inhumane. Not like anybody means to be cruel. There are some places where it's actually cruel. Like prison labor and that sort of thing. But um, because emotions got thrown out of the workplace, we've basically taken people's capacity for self awareness and other awareness within a social group. We've thrown it out. And so people are just sort of thrown to the wolves in a way.
Mm.
Um, Although wolves aren't mean, thrown to the piranhas. There we go.
Mm.
Of um, uh, Anything could happen in the workplace. And if we
Yeah.
don't have a social structure that's healthy, and if we don't have social agreements, if people don't have emotional skills, if people don't even know what emotions are, then we are going to have an unself aware group. And so the emotions never stop. No matter how much you try to repress them, they're still there because they're a function of your intelligence and your cognition. Um, so I listen to which emotions are there. And it tells me, basically, if I know, like, give me 5 emotions that you see a lot, I basically can diagnose the entire social structure at this point. I'm like, boom, boom, boom. I pretend that it takes longer because I don't want it to look like there's something that they missed or something. But if
Yeah.
you can see what emotions are happening, you can tell what's happening in the structure. If you see a lot of anger, there's boundary breaking happening all the time because anger is about boundaries. If there's a lot of anxiety, probably people's workloads are not being managed appropriately.
Mm.
Um, there's a lot of jealousy and envy. There is inequality and injustice baked into the system.
Mhm.
So people are responding to the social structure. And if they don't know why, again, it's just like if you don't know why you're feeling the way you do, you're kind of clueless about what to do next.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens if an entire social structure is not emotionally awake, it sort of doesn't know what it's doing.
Mm.
Yeah.
That is so true. It gets such a big thing nowadays, and it's not. easy to recognize, but you're so
Mhm.
right in saying that if you can identify the emotions in the workplace, you can see what's going on straight away. And
Yeah.
a lot of self awareness plays into that because perhaps the person that is in charge, or if the leader, it's not aware of how they're feeling in the first place or what they want, that could cause
Mhm.
a lot of distress amongst other people. But then the distress wouldn't be registered as something that's going on because maybe that person's vocabulary when it comes to self-awareness and emotional self-awareness is already limited. So it's just so
Mhm.
important that everyone curates this. And I think from what you said, it's
Mhm.
even more important to, for anyone who's listening that's like a C-level executive, or like a
Mhm.
manager or a team leader. It's even more important for these people to curate that level of self-awareness and empathy, because it all starts from there. We have
Mhm.
interaction, we have collaboration, but a lot of the communication still comes top down. So it's
Mhm.
very crucial that everyone registers this. And I really hope that this message gets to as many people as possible, especially those in leadership positions, because they really affect how their teams and their people interact and work and how they feel at work, even. Um,
Mhm.
so that's uh, emotional self-awareness, and also empathy in the workplace. We see that it's very important. We also talked about how important it is. You touched on it. When you have interaction with yourself, when you have interaction with your friends and family, it is crucial in our everyday life. And when you're well, when you can manage your well-being, then you are a better person for any social groups that you belong to, whether it be
Mhm.
family or work. So that leads me to the next section of the podcast, which is the practice section. We talk about the theory. Now we have the practice. So we
Mhm.
know we know the definitions. We know all about self-awareness, emotional fluency, and like you said, even emotional granularity. So there are quite a few
Mhm.
concepts there, but to kind of tie it all in together, let's be practical. If we were
Mhm.
to actually take it into practice now, what would you say to be a practice that you could recommend to anyone when it comes to emotional self-awareness, or just self-awareness in general?
Mhm. I would say, again, emotional granularity is so crucial. And one of the things they're finding about emotional granularity is not just, it doesn't just give you better emotional regulation skills and self awareness skills, it can actually have heart and brain protective um, effects as well. So it's kind of magical. In a workplace, it would be allowing or giving everybody an emotional vocabulary list and everybody an understanding of what the emotions do so they can begin to have intelligent conversations about what they're sensing as individuals and to say, are you feeling this too? I'm feeling like a little bit envious about this or this, or I'm feeling some anger here. Are you feeling it too? And then they can begin to understand, oh, there's something in the structure. If more than one of us is feeling the exact same way, which is very unusual, um, then I think there's something going on in the structure,
Yeah.
and then you can have this awareness. But the practice would be to put your vocabulary into practice with your own self, and then in a workplace I try to get everyone sharing the same skills so that now emotions aren't this secret, weird, non-understood, repressed, doesn't belong at work kind of nonsense. But now we bring emotions into the center of the workplace, and a
Mm.
lot of CEOs would say, no, no, you cannot have emotions in the workplace. I said, well, do you have humans in the workplace? Then you've
Yes.
got emotions.
Yeah.
Okay. And emotions, empathy is the foundation the foundation of empathy is emotional. Empathy is your emotional awareness. So if you don't know what emotions are, your empathy is not going to be that malleable or strong or whole bodied. You'll just have empathy for the, like, I don't know, four emotions that you understand.
Mm.
And if somebody's
Yeah.
really angry and you don't have a practice for anger, you're not going to have empathy for that person. you know?
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you say that if we were to make it a practice for ourselves, let's just say individuals
Mhm.
practicing um, improving our vocabulary on emotions and
Mhm.
practicing sharing about our emotions more openly using the emotional granularity where we can
Mhm. Mhm.
would be a way for us to sort of, just curate that self awareness and
Mhm.
also empathy, not just towards
Mhm.
ourselves, but towards others.
Yeah. I think another practice that I would focus on in the workplace, because if people are back at work, if they're not at home, as we know, our surroundings really affect us. They affect us powerfully. And a lot of people, in at least here in the Great Resignation, simply did not want to go back into the office. They did
Yeah.
not want to go back into the store. That was nope, I do not want to be there.
Yeah.
Um, and so to begin looking at the workplace in terms of, could a human exist here comfortably? And the answer with most workplaces is no. Mm-mm. No. There's no quiet, there's no privacy, there's no break area that's truly away from the work. There's no place to get away safely, or, so, because people are going to be like, where is she going? You know, is she taking another break? Like, is it emotionally and socially and physically comfortable to be in your workplace? If it isn't, there will be emotional problems there,
Mm.
because you're putting humans in a bad environment. You're putting them, if you were a zookeeper and they were tigers, the tigers would just be so depressed.
Yeah.
They just like, they wouldn't have anything to climb on.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even be able to be tigers. They would just
Mm.
mostly be angry and slapping you all the time. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so I think that's another huge practice, is to, bring a child in, bring a 6 to 10-year-old child, and ask the child, is this a comfortable place to be? Children will tell you, no, this is awful. there's
Yeah.
there's nothing fluffy here. There's no place to play. You can't be on the floor. Um, yeah, that's a huge practice in the workplace, is that they are not built for human beings.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
just the physical plan, the physical layout of most workplaces makes people miserable.
Mm. That is so interesting because, maybe we were just so used to it that we never questioned it. But after,
Yeah.
2 years of COVID,
Pa-
everyone has
Pajama
actually
Zooms.
noticed. Yeah.
Yes.
Now everyone's noticed. Everyone knows that, it is not meant to be that way. And
Yeah.
yeah, it affects us quite a bit, especially the well-being in the workplace. And it all starts from
Yeah.
self-awareness actually, because we know that, oh, now that I've got to work from home, I know that, yep, this is my work corner.
Yeah.
When I feel overwhelmed or when I feel like I need a break from my screens, I have a zen corner, or maybe I can just actually go out for a short walk.
Yeah.
In the workplace is actually quite hard. But then if we have that, level of self-awareness, we would then be able to translate it into empathy as well, because we know,
Mhm.
oh, my colleague needs a minute or they need 10.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
not going to even ask what they need to do. I'm not going to even ask why they're out because, we just
Yeah.
need it. And when you're working from home, no one's asking you. So I think just the practice, the very practice of curating that level of self awareness, identifying how you're feeling, how you deal with your certain emotions would then be able to allow you to broaden your mind, in the first place to understand, yep, other people have other ways of dealing with their particular emotions when they arise. So, we
Yeah.
all come from a place of empathy and we respect how people behave as much as we would want to be respected for how we behave when it comes to our certain emotions as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
mm, so I think, like it's actually hard, as we have discussed quite a bit, because, like the vocabulary, like being able to say honest things when it comes to our emotion is probably not easy. From your research and
Mhm.
from your work, what do you notice to be some of the challenges when people practice this?
A lot of it is that I talked to an actor who said, if an actor went like this, "Grr, I'm mad," or, "Oh, I'm sad," you would know that they're a terrible, terrible actor, right? They're a hack, because The way that humans have learned to present their emotions is usually with subterfuge or just right out lying. What do you mean angry? I'm not angry. Your mother's angry, right? I'm not sad. I'm not sad. Why would you think I'm sad? Like we spend most of our time pretending that we're not feeling what we're feeling. And so that is a huge stumbling block because for many people, they feel emotions about emotions. They feel ashamed of feeling shame. They feel angry about being angry. They feel afraid of being afraid. And so
Yeah.
just
Wow.
a normal human emotion comes out, and all of a sudden there's an emotion pile up. And
Mm,
so that's one of the things. It's pretty brave to start to open up and to be able to say out loud, I'm afraid about what we're trying to do in the Cincinnati job. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety about that. And usually in most workplaces, you would not even be able to begin that sentence before they hushed you. They just shush, shush. We need positive energy in this. You know, you need to go lay down, take a nap, pal. Um,
mm,
that that it's a tremendously brave thing in a social structure where we've learned to lie about emotions to ourselves and others because we want to save face. Right? For instance, there's many cases where you need to cry, but you know you will lose your social standing if you
mm.
do.
Yeah.
Um, right? You
Mm.
just need to push those tears right back into your tear ducts and you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
soldier on.
Mm,
There's all kinds of emotions like that, especially for we have lots of gender splits in emotions. Women are not allowed to be angry out loud, or they get a name that rhymes with witch. Um, Men are not allowed to express grief or sadness, or they get a
mm.
name that rhymes with wussy. And
Yeah.
um, right, so we're actually separated out from our emotions, and
Yeah.
so it's there's a tremendous bravery there, but
Mm.
it's really a job that's worth doing because we become self-aware and other-aware and more functional in our lives.
Mm. That is beautiful. Yeah, because so those are like the three benefits that you see right there, right? Like just for
Yeah.
yourself, for others, and it's a functional life. That's how life's supposed to be about. You touched on a very interesting point earlier when you said suppressing our emotion in the
Mhm.
workplace because we feel bad about feeling bad and so on.
Yeah.
I remember, and this is going to be really hard to talk about, but I remember being overwhelmed a long time ago at a at a previous job, one of my like earliest job ever, um, and feeling overwhelmed because of the workload, and feeling overwhelmed because life was hard. So it's not
Yeah.
all about work, but it was about like other stuff as well. And I think I was at the office, and again, an office that was not meant to be an office because it was not like the most comfortable place. And feeling overwhelmed, I just kind of broke down crying,
Mhm.
and my colleagues were really nice. They were so sweet, and they came to comfort me. Not even they didn't even ask what happened because obviously I was overcome with emotions. I
Mhm.
knew that I was overwhelmed. I knew that I was sad. I knew that I was really anxious about a lot of things. They didn't even ask for that. But then later down the track, I actually got a comment that was like, "You should have been more professional." But I from what you've shared with me, this is just my interpretation. So from what you've shared with me, maybe a lot of people are on the same boat as I was.
Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
think it's such an important thing to share because like when you have that emotional awareness, you know that you're a human, and you know that you are doing your job, but at the same time you're allowed to feel things because you're humans. So,
Mhm.
it's from this practice, it's so important that everyone acknowledges that we're not machines, and
Yeah.
when someone feels the same way, or when someone behaves in ways that would be it seems emotional, it's not like it's um unacceptable, I would say, like from
Mhm.
that, because if we have the level of self-awareness, we would know that we would be on the same boat had we been in the same
Mhm.
situation. Or maybe you're just suppressing emotions, and like you said earlier, if we have self-awareness, and when we have self-awareness, we know that suppressing is not a good thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
And one thing I was thinking about that is that in an emotionally well regulated workplace where people had skills, people would say, okay, Lou is overwhelmed and we need to check in right away to look at her workload. Maybe it's from home, maybe it's, you know, the way she manages herself, but it could also be the workload or all three,
Yeah.
rather than saying, your tears belong to you and they don't belong in the office and they have nothing to say to any of us because they're just a sign of your problems, right? Which is
Hmm.
exactly wrong.
Yeah.
um, that sadness, that grief, that anxiety was trying to come out and be witnessed in that social structure that called them forward, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So, like, because you weren't crying at home alone, you were at work. And so that would be so important, for me as a
Yeah.
consultant coming in. I would be
Mm.
like, okay, there she is. There she is. She's telling us the truth about what's going on here. And the
Mm.
rest of you who are saying to her to be professional, you're making it worse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They actually have a name for that in the workplace. It's called toxic positivity bias,
Oh, I've
where,
heard that. Yeah.
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 And that's, I just love that. It's so perfect because that positivity is toxic. It is, it's a
Yeah.
lie. That's not what was going on. You weren't
Yeah.
feeling happy and content and joyful. You were
Yeah.
feeling what you were feeling. It was
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're right. Like, and I feel like when we look at this, it translates to all other circumstances in life as well. Because a lot of times, even another example could be, a kid crying, and
Hmm.
then parents would be like, "Stop crying! What do you have to cry about? It's nothing."
Yeah.
Maybe it's not nothing, and you're denying them the right to feel their emotions, and that's
Yes.
yeah, that's probably super detrimental to their growth. Because I think,
Yeah.
yeah, when you shared about toxic positivity bias, and also like the workplace and all the other situations that I could think of ever, it's just so important that we curate that level of empathy based on the self-awareness we have, based on the emotional granularity that we can feel and we can share with others. Because once we have that, we know that we're complex creatures, and
Hmm.
it's unfair to ask anyone to suppress it, because we're talking about how to bring it out. We're not talking
Yeah.
about suppressing it, and that's like the exact opposite of what we're supposed to do here. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it starts from home. It starts from from within yourself. From raising children, and in the
Hmm.
workplace, definitely, because you spend so much of your time at work. It's so important to be able to be yourself and to be able to manage your well-being there, because it affects other areas of your life too.
Hmm. I just got um, a note from a mom who had just downloaded a children's version of the emotional vocabulary list. And she said her son just fell into a snit. He was about 7 or 8. Just he fell apart. He was melting down. And she didn't know what had happened. And couldn't tell her. So she said, well, will you look at this list and tell me if you see what you're feeling on here? Right? I
Yeah.
don't know how the child was able to read at that point, but the child took the list and found a word. It's like, this is what I'm feeling.
Mm.
And so the mom said, yeah. And the child stops crying and goes, can we go on a bike ride? It was like all that needed to happen was to
Yeah.
find the feeling
Yeah.
and have the mom go, yeah, instead of, shaming the child. Well, you shouldn't be crying. You are 7 years old. You're not a baby anymore. That kind of kind of emotional abuse that a lot of us experienced as children. Um,
Yeah.
that that just knowing the word was like, can we go on a bike ride? It was. I love that story,
Mm.
and the magic. It's magical to be able
Yeah.
to know what you're feeling
Absolutely.
and to have other people say, if somebody in that room could have said, Lou, this is a lot of sadness and grief and anxiety, and we know what
Mm.
those mean. It
Yeah.
means you need to let stuff go. It means something has died. It means there's too much on your plate. how can we help, instead of just sort of, oh, they're there now.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they just wait, like, I don't know, a day or two, and then go, you should have been more professional. No.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can laugh about it now. It was pretty horrible
Yeah.
back then, but it's just a good
Yes.
lesson to me, in the context of today's conversation, because I've realized that we can all curate our vocabulary, and we can all
Mhm.
start there to curate our empathy, wherever you are, whichever context we're talking about here, because you just mentioned a child, right? That starts
Yeah.
from home, parenting,
Yeah.
being with your family, being with a child. And it's so important because a lot of childhood trauma could start that way. And
Yeah.
being able to do this, we're going to help to raise happy, healthy adults who have
Mhm.
healthy coping mechanism, who could manage their well-being, and then who could be
Yeah.
better adults at the workplace as well. Because it starts from the smallest of things, like you said. Like, this is such a good practice, and even though it's hard, it sounds like it should happen for everyone. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you have like a set time that you would recommend doing it, but I would reckon it's probably just how you go about your day, and you just do it. Or do you
Yeah.
actually set time?
Well, I did early on because I had to figure out all these emotions. There was a lot
Yeah,
going on.
yeah.
But now that I've, sort of identified them and started working with them, now I can just pretty much go, huh, that's some depression. Oh, here's some anxiety, and know what's going on. Yeah.
Okay,
And
yeah.
but sometimes I do, like, I'll have like a whole bunch of emotions at once, and I'll have to go and like look at my, what am I feeling? Okay, here I
Mm,
am.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm
yeah,
low, I'm wistful, I'm resentful, that sort of thing. It's really
yeah,
fun to be able to
yeah.
sort of locate myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, for someone that, if someone just realized after this podcast, let's just say, imagine if there's a listener who just realized, oh, you know what? I should do this now. I should curate my vocabulary, and I should pinpoint my uh, emotional granularity. Then
Mhm.
when do you say would be the best time to do this, and how should they go about it if they're so new to this?
I made another free thing. It was a free emotion chart for kids.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, I gave them 3 or 4 simple vocabulary words, and it would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And they could write down, I felt angry on Monday, I felt sad on Monday, right? And to do that. And then adults asked me to make one for them.
Mm.
And I was like, really? Does anybody need this? And so I made another free one, which
Yeah.
is an emotion chart for adults, so that you can actually write down what you're feeling, and then the second page talks about what the emotions do or why they come forward, like anger for boundaries, and sadness for letting things go, and anxiety for helping you do your work, panic if you're in danger, things like that, so that people will like be able to go X, and then track their emotions. This would be a great app,
Yeah.
but app development is serious. Like, you
Yeah.
can't just,
It
yeah, you
is.
can't just breeze into app development. But that way you could track your emotions over, and see
Yeah.
what was happening in April, that there was so
Yeah.
much anger going on. Yeah.
Oh, that's such a
But
good
yeah,
idea. Yeah.
yeah,
A daily
yeah.
a daily tracking would be really good. And Carla, maybe this is your next idea, the
That's my
next thing you're
next
gonna
app.
be on. Yeah, your next app.
Yeah.
We
Yes,
just
I only need a couple of hundred
did
thousand
it.
dollars, but
Yeah,
that's
we just
fine.
did it. Yeah. You know what? This is a good pitch for the investors, this whole podcast. There you go.
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for that. So
Yeah.
that is a really, I think that was a really enlightening sort of conversation for us to walk away from and say, you know what, I'm going to start doing this on the daily now that I've got the
Mhm.
understanding that it's so important for me. And I'm sure your listeners can visit your website and,
Mhm.
take a look at those free resources. They sound amazing. I'm going to do
Yeah.
that today for sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll benefit from that and share with my friends and others. I think it's very important. I guess, in the context of this, we have talked a lot about self-awareness, emotional self-awareness,
Mhm.
emotional granularity, and definitely well-being as well. And I think, just to sum it up, I really appreciate, the honesty you bring, the insights, the research. It seems like you're really immersed in research, the research of others as well. So it's really good to hear from you. But we also want to know, this is the next part of the podcast. It's kind of fun. We call it open mic because we know that a human is so much more than just their work. We just talked about that. You're a human. You have your emotions. You have your care and your passion outside of this area, perhaps. So with the open mic section, we normally invite our guests to talk about anything that they wish to share. It doesn't have to be related to the topic.
Mhm.
It could be related to the topic if you like, because you probably live and breathe your work. But if you were to have a couple of minutes to talk about something that you've been really passionate about and you wish to share with as many people as possible, what would you talk about?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is something that I haven't been able to do throughout the pandemic, which is sing a cappella harmony with other people in the same
Oh,
room without
oh,
masks on, right?
yeah, yeah.
I don't know if you, early on in the pandemic, there was a church choir in Oregon
Mm.
that they sang pretty far apart from each other and they were being very careful and they all got COVID. They just all did. And that's when we
Oh
learned that
no.
the more intense or loud your speaking or your singing is, the more likely you are to. So that's been really difficult for me because singing harmony is one of the most um, one of the most transporting and joyful and delightful things that I know in this world. And for me, it's a highly empathic experience because you have to really tune into the person. It's not just singing a note that's different from the other person's note. You have to read people and look at them and be with them very, very deeply. And I have a relationship like that with my husband, but he doesn't sing. So I have not been able to sing harmony with people for what? How is this year 10 of the pandemic? Which one?
Yeah,
Is it?
I've stopped counting. Yeah, I think
Okay,
it's safe to
good.
say it feels like year 10. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's year 10. So
Yeah.
that's been really hard because that is like one of the central joys of my life is, if I would hear singers on the street and I'd go right away and I'm like, I'm your backup singer now. We're going to sing harmony.
Oh,
Um, yeah.
that's
So
amazing.
that's a big thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that sounds to one at one point in our lives it sounded mundane, but now it sounds like something that you just miss so much. It's like magic in your
Yeah.
life, right? So, yeah, I
Yeah.
hope you get to do that soon. It sounds
I know.
fun. Yeah, it would be fun to be able to do that, especially without mask in the same room with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And before we let you go, this is the final part of the podcast where we have our audience submit some questions about the topic. And we have covered the topic, in great details. But if we were to get some questions from audience, I think this is actually quite interesting too. So we have just a couple of questions for you. I think this one in particular I really like. The question is, how can someone identify when they're acting out of emotions and becoming irrational? That's $1 million question right there.
um, we are always acting out of emotions. We can't not act. Emotions are the center of action and cognition. So we always are acting from emotions, and the concept of rational as being separate from emotion
Mm.
is it's a false dichotomy. So
Oh,
the, if we don't have skills with our emotions, then it's going to look bad no matter what. But
yeah.
that's not the emotion's fault. Right? If anger comes up to help you set a boundary and you got no skills, and so you do it by screaming at someone, well, that's a
Mm.
boundary, but it's a terrible one, right? Or you don't know how to use anger at all, so you don't set a boundary at all, and now the person doesn't even know what's up or down. That's
Mm.
not anger's fault. That's the fault of our very poor emotional awareness.
Wow, that is very interesting. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I mean, we probably touched on it earlier, but it was not explicitly said like you just said so beautifully. Like it's not irrational if it is supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be that we understand our emotions and we act accordingly. And we just
Yeah.
need to, equip ourselves with the right vocabulary and perhaps, if it's hard for some people to navigate emotions, maybe the right strategies to stop
Yes.
ourselves when things happen, and come up with calm way to deal with things rather than lashing out or doing things that you would regret. So that's
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other question we have is, sometimes we can forget about ourselves when focused on the other challenges and responsibilities of life. Is there a practice that can help me make a routine to check myself? This is a really good question.
Yeah. Something that I did, I used to be so overwhelmed with the needs of others and also very, very, very busy that I would get up and I wouldn't even have my life for 5 minutes in the morning, if you know what I mean. You
Yeah.
just get up and you go into work. And what
Mm,
do people need? And I learned to, just while I'm lying in bed, to say, what two things do I want today? And then
mm,
do those two things if I possibly can. It was a way to get back into my own self. And I had to do it in bed before I got up because as soon as my foot hit the ground, I was going, right? I was like,
yeah.
what needs to be done? What do people need? What, blah, blah, blah. And so it's sort of like to put a little a time out and try to start each day. And so after a while, I didn't have to ask myself what two things anymore. Maybe it took 2 weeks for me to get myself out of that,
Mm,
cycle.
yeah.
And then I was able to wake up in the morning and go, you know what I want to do? And I didn't have to count two things,
Mm,
right? I would
yeah.
be like, I want to do this and this and this for myself. So it was
Yeah.
sort of like waking myself out of a trance.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. And I think maybe you coupled it with, I don't know, maybe journaling. Like write
Hmm.
down what's been going on and checking in with yourselves, how you're feeling. And I think, what, related back to the topic, if you're feeling a bit sad, it could be because you're not doing the things that you're supposed to do for yourself, for example. So catching
Yeah.
yourself feeling that way, you'll be able to say, like you said, okay, so what are two things that I want to do now that I know that? And,
Yeah.
kind of bring yourself back to yourself. And I
Yeah.
find that, yeah, it's so important because we are all so busy nowadays, just constantly on the go with things. It could get, you could get easily swept away in like, responsibilities or, things that you need to prioritize. And sometimes you forget that the things you need to prioritize might not be the things that you actually want for yourself in the first place. Or, you might forget to do certain things that would bring yourself back to,
Yeah.
where you are and who you should be. That's very,
Yeah.
very good tips. Thank you for sharing that. And those are all the questions we have for today. Particularly have learned a lot of tips and strategies from you, and I've got definitely a couple of reminders right there for myself and my daily habits. So thank you so much, Carla, for sharing with us, for coming on the show today. And yes, we are definitely speaking from the future, and hopefully it has been fun for you as well to talk to the future. I've I've definitely really enjoyed in our conversation, and the insights you've shared.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lou.
You've been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.